Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in the Principles of Ethics by Borden Parker Bowne, published in 1892. We've already looked at our introduction. Now we're going to take a look at Chapter 1, which is the order of moral ideas. And Bowne does believe that we need to arrange our eidos ideas into a ordered system. So at the very beginning of the book, he begins with the ordering of the moral ideas. We already have our metaphysics as a foundation of his work, so we have a great advantage there. Let's go to block 1. We're going to take a look at the form and content of our ethics. And we begin with ethics as a telos form. 3 leading moral ideas are the good, duty, and virtue. There are 2 standpoints, the inductive, which addresses form, and the theoretical, which emphasizes system. Now, basic aspects of the moral act are: moral action must be abbreviated under rational action, and telos must be directed towards the good of some sort, and the supreme law of life must be directed toward the good. Now, under content, in Note 2, ethics as oughtness content, moral duty must be within the reign of the good and its categorical principles. Now, discovering the good and its principles occurs through experience and rational reflection. The good is not always seen, but it is always believed in. So if we have a telos form and an oughtness content, we can define our principles of action. The ground of the principles of action are found in the telos end, the eschatological end. Reason always makes room for the return moment of revision. Action will address both motive and consequence, both. It will address motive and consequence. So, ethics is eschatological. Ethics has the form of teleology. It has the content of that which is categories or principles, but they aren't always seen. They are apprehended through reason, and it helps us to define that supreme law of life. So let's move on to block 2 and take a look at ethics as relation within system. The subjective ideal of right. Moral action depends on the subjective ideal held by the self. Action should be grounded by right principles and guided by right knowledge. Judgments are judgments of wisdom, which addresses consequence, and judgments of morality, which addresses motive. Now, judgment of phronesis wisdom, or practical wisdom, addresses the effect of our posited ethics. And moral judgment addresses the expression of the posited self as agent. We are positing our system, but we are also, Bowne reminds us, positing self as moral agent. So we are maturing in our Christian faith as we posit and act in moral act. All right, if you look at Note 2, the objective going out of the self, when our praxis is properly understood, the posited theoretical system becomes our visualized object. We also will estimate the prudence of our moral praxis. Bowne says moral action has 2 factors. It includes the objective estimation of consequences and the subjective self as posited moral agent, our own moral agency. So if we take a look at subjective ideal and objective estimation of consequences, that becomes our practical posited phronesis. Remember, Greek phronesis equals practical wisdom. So positing is the positing of The theoretical narrowed it down to the practical, posited phronesis. Action must always have right moral form, the theoretical, but it must transition to address specific content. Theoretical system must become posited phronesis as practical. So note 4, posited phronesis. At the practical level, we address state of mind, our motivation, our wisdom of the heart, and elements of the environment. The goodwill is actualized through a realization of praxis dialectic. We know this from having already understood his metaphysics, already studied his metaphysics, but we have the goodwill, which is that theoretical system, being actualized through a positive phronesis and then the realization of praxis dialectic. There's always tension between the practical law of well-being and the theoretical law of ideal form. There are also subjective consequences that come out of praxis action, as return moment. Remember, we're looking at a modified and a clarified version of Hegel here when we look at Bowne. Modified and clarified, I might add, because Bowne is much more precise in definition, so I say clarified as well. But we do begin with that theoretical law of ideal form. Then we have that positive phronesis of practical wisdom that leads to realization through praxis action. It will include a return moment, so we're going to move on to block 3 and take a look at positive phronesis and return moment. And you can see how this lesson is building beautifully. I mean, this is really, remember the raw material had to include one of those areas of knowledge was the relationship between metaphysics and ethics. This lesson immediately addresses the relationship between ethics and metaphysics. He's giving us a great picture of that relationship. So block 3, positive phronesis and return. We begin with state of mind. The good, duty, and virtue are the fundamental moral ideas. Our subjective moral constitution makes various goods possible. The forms of well-being, in other words, the practical, remember the well-being is phronesis. The forms of well-being are first founded in the mind, in the theoretical mind, and in external relation. This state of mind conditions all moral activity, but there also must be that activity of free spirit, and he means free finite spirit. In other words, practical phronesis and practical praxis. State of mind must transition to practical activity of the free finite spirit. So note 2, activity of free spirit. The free spirit devotes itself to realization, to actualization, and I love this right here, as the superinducement of ideas upon nature. Now, we did not have this in the metaphysics, but I love this. Bowne says it is the tupas imprinting of the natural plane that raises it up to the moral plane. He calls it a tupas imprinting. It's that Greek tupas, the stamping of an image on a coin. Remember, tupas imprinting. We're supposed to imprint Jesus Christ in our hearts as tupas imprinting. Well, Bowne says that tupas imprinting is this method of positing our practical version of our system of moral ideas and imprinting them on the natural plane. To egeiro, raise them up to the moral plane. The free finite spirit equals the self's rational freedom. This brings about the unification of duty and happiness together. So, free finite spirit, that's the rational freedom of the moral agent. Self as moral agent. Believer as moral agent, seeking to realize kingdom. Okay, let's take a look at note 3, the state of mind and the rational free spirit equal dialectical realization. The natural world becomes imprinted with moral form. We are to actualize the good that previously was only a shadowed forth tendency in reality. We do pick up through spiritual perception these tendencies toward kingdom that are veiled yet asking for participation. Therefore, our moral action is twofold. It includes formal gnosis as the posited agent's free will, and practical phronesis that will harmonize reality with practical well-being, that narrowed down posited model of eidos ideas, making it specific. So note 4, dialectical realization unites formal gnosis with practical phronesis. Agency is the aim to be materially right, and to material rightness the agent adds the rightness of formal goodwill. So, and don't get confused here, when Bowne uses goodwill, he's talking about the formal model. When he uses well-being, he's talking about the practical narrowed down positing. But the agent adds, to material rightness, the agent adds the rightness of formal goodwill. So these two aspects are formal right, true to convictions of the heart or the state of mind, and material right, that imprinting of reality with moral principles. That's moral action. It includes formal right and material right. Formal right is our system of ideas as the theoretical sign model that we have formed out of the notions of the true. Material right says we can't remain in the theoretical. We must become practical. We must do what we preach. We must act in the way that we proclaim. Proclaiming the kingdom is followed by acting to actualize kingdom. And that means tupos imprinting, the natural plane with the moral plane, in order to raise it up, that egeiro, raising up, resurrection power. So note 5, the tupos imprinting of nature creates harmony with the universe. We include the harmony of the affections and the emotions as well. Subjective being must also be addressed in realization. Remember, we are positing the agency of the self as well. So subjective being must be addressed in realization. It is included. Insight into moral relations always takes precedence. There must be both volitional submission and interest of affections. So it is a volitional act, but it must include motivational interest. Consequences become the returning criteria for rightness, which the self must reflect upon and internalize. I love that. He calls it returning criteria now. We didn't have that in metaphysics. We knew about the return moment, but he didn't call it the returning criteria. I like that term. The surplus of the good of kingdom, the surplus of promise, of divine promise, that we become aware of when we engage in praxis ministry, creates these criteria, these returning moments of truth that we didn't know before. We learn through doing, we learn through ministry, and that becomes a criteria to be internalized to revise our sign model of kingdom. To revise our sign model of kingdom. To make it more mature, more in alignment with Christ, and to make our state of mind, our subjective believing self, our motivational base, more in alignment with Christ also. So it's extremely important. This third moment, Hegel's third moment for Bowne, is extremely important. It has the returning criteria for rightness, for maturity in the Christian faith. So it's again, it's Bowne not hesitating. We've only had the introduction, and now look at this. Chapter 1 aggressively jumps right into the school of thought on the relationship between metaphysics and ethics. He wants to get that clear in the very beginning, so we know that it is very much an interrelated dynamic between metaphysics and ethics. They are not completely separated in Bowne's mind. They are not completely separated in the realm of spirit. And Bowne most certainly addresses the realm of spirit in Metaphysics and Ethics. That's what he's all about, the dynamic movement from dunamis to energia, that movement of spirit. Bowne's all about that. He thinks Hegel gave the best view of that movement of spirit, but I think he clarifies it better. I think he has a better presentation. So this lesson gives us a profound beginning to his Christian ethics. In a mere 27 pages, pages 20 to 47, we got to look at system. We got to look at the ordering of the moral ideas. We got to look at the fact that Bowne says we must include the subjective self growing in maturity in Jesus Christ as well. So we're going to pick up with chapter 2 next. That's going to begin on page 47, and that'll wrap up this lesson on the ordering of moral ideas.